There is a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't make sense on paper. The house is warm, the food is on the table, no one is shouting, no doors are slamming. From the outside, everything looks fine, but something inside you is scanning. Something inside you has always been scanning. Not for danger exactly, not for anything you could point to or name. Just a feeling, a quiet tightening in the chest, a held breath, a low hum of alertness that never fully went quiet, no matter how still the house became. You learn to read the atmosphere of a room the way other children learn to read books. Not because someone taught you, because you had to. Home was supposed to be the place where you didn't have to work so hard. For you, it wasn't. If something in those words just landed in a place you recognize, if you are quietly nodding or quietly stilling, then this is for you. Not because something was wrong with you, but because something was working exactly as it was designed to. Your nervous system wasn't malfunctioning. It was calibrating, reading every emotional fluctuation in the people around you, adjusting, absorbing, adapting. And it did that for a reason. The most loving reason a child is capable of. Psychologists call this emotional hypervigilance. It is when a child becomes so finely attuned to the emotional atmosphere of their home that they begin to process other people's feelings before their own. Not as a choice, as a survival strategy. This isn't weakness. This is what sensitivity does when it grows up inside a house that has no container for it. Let me tell you about a child. Let's call her Layla. Layla was 7 years old when she first noticed the specific way her mother's voice changed on certain evenings. A slight tightening at the edges, a quietness that wasn't peace. To the untrained ear, it sounded like any other silence. But Layla had been listening, really listening, for years. She knew the difference between the silence that meant safety and the silence that meant something is coming. The house wasn't loud. It was never particularly dramatic. No one sat Layla down and told her what to feel. No one gave her a job description. But somehow, the way water finds cracks in stone, she became the person who managed the emotional weather. She softened herself when the tension was high. She made herself smaller when she sensed they needed space. She laughed a little louder when she felt the room needed warmth. She stopped asking for things, not because she didn't want them, but because her own needs felt like one more weight she had no right to add to the atmosphere. She learned to fold herself into whatever shape the house seemed to need. And she was very, very good at it. The problem was, nobody ever told her when she could stop. Fast forward. That child who learned to fold is now an adult. Maybe she is 28 now, or 38, or 48. She still walks into rooms and immediately scans for who is upset. She still adjusts her energy to match the temperature around her. She still puts her own needs last, not as a deliberate act of kindness, but as a reflex so old, so deep. She no longer recognizes it as a behavior she once learned. It simply feels like who she is. But here is where the psychology deepens. Because underneath all of this, there is a question that almost never gets asked. Not, why did this child feel so much? But why did feeling so much happen at home? The one place in the world designed to make you feel less. Hold on to that, because the answer changes everything about how you see yourself. And I'll come back to it. Children who grow up in homes with emotional unpredictability, even subtle unpredictability, even the kind with no raised voices, no visible abuse, nothing a court would name or recognize, develop what researchers at the Harvard Center on the Developing Child describe as a chronically activated stress response system. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes calibrated not to external danger, but to the emotional climate inside the home, the very place that should have lowered the alert, the place that was supposed to send the signal, "You can rest now." Instead, it became the training ground. And here is what that does to a child, quietly, over years. They become extraordinarily skilled at reading people, at detecting shifts in emotional atmosphere before a word has been spoken, at predicting what someone needs before that person has identified it themselves, at holding the emotional weight of the room while carrying their own feelings somewhere beneath the surface, buried, managed, postponed. They become, in the truest sense, emotional laborers. But they were never paid for the work, and no one ever called it work. Donald Winnicott, the British psychologist who spent his life studying children and their inner worlds, had a phrase for this. The false self. It is the adapted personality, the version of you that was built not from your own needs and nature, but from the requirements of your environment. Warm where it needed warmth, invisible where it needed silence, cheerful where it needed lightness, careful, always, always careful, not to take up too much space. The false self is not a lie, it is an act of love. But acts of love that cost you everything are not sustainable. And the child who performed them, who gave and adjusted and absorbed year after year without ever being refilled, grew into an adult who doesn't quite know how to receive, who flinches slightly when someone offers gentleness, who waits, even in safety, for the conditions attached, because home taught them, without ever saying it directly, that love is a thing you earn, that presence is a thing you maintain, that the price of belonging is the willingness to disappear. Now, here is the thing most people never see. Most people look at the adult this child becomes and see someone exhausted, anxious at the edges, someone who overthinks, someone who struggles to receive love without waiting for the fine print, someone who, even in a quiet room, cannot fully rest. And all of that is true. But here is the paradox. The very sensitivity that made home feel like too much is the same sensitivity that makes this person one of the most emotionally extraordinary human beings in any room they walk into. Think about what this child actually built. They built the capacity to feel other people's pain before those people have spoken it. They built an internal radar so precise, so finely tuned, that they can sense the weight beneath someone's smile, the loneliness behind someone's laughter, the fear that lives underneath someone's anger. They became, without anyone designing it, without anyone rewarding it, some of the most perceptive, compassionate, deeply attuned people alive. The child who felt too much at home did not develop a disorder. They developed a depth. Here's the thing. The question was never, why do I feel so much? The question was always, why was I never given permission to put some of it down? And that is the answer I promised you earlier. The child felt too much at home, not because they were broken, but because home was asking too much of them. The sensitivity was never the problem. The container was too small for it. The people around them were, in most cases, doing their own version of surviving, carrying their own unnamed weight, their own unresolved grief, their own inherited silence, and the most feeling child in the room absorbed all of it, not because they chose to, because they could. And in a household that didn't know how to carry its own emotional load, that ability made the child quietly, invisibly, indispensable. That's not weakness. That's not pathology. That is a gift that was never treated like one. Maybe you already know some of this. Maybe you are sitting with it quietly right now, in the particular way that people who have always been quiet sit with things, turning it over, testing it against your own memory, wondering if it's really permission you're being given or just another idea you'll absorb and extend to someone else before you ever let it touch you. That impulse to process the insight and then immediately give it away is itself the pattern. So let me say this slowly. Your nervous system learned to work overtime because it once had to. That was not a mistake. That was love, expressed as vigilance, expressed as availability, expressed as the only tool a child had to try to keep the emotional peace of the world they lived in. But you are no longer that child. The armor that once protected you is still there, quietly, running in the background, scanning rooms that are no longer dangerous, managing temperatures that no longer require management. And the cruelest part of emotional hypervigilance is that it cannot tell the difference between the home that needed it then and the life that is asking for something different now. Neuroscience offers one word that matters here: neuroplasticity. The brain is not fixed. The pathways that were carved into you in childhood, the ones that say scan, adjust, make yourself smaller, earn your place, those are not permanent sentences. They are patterns. And patterns, with time and with patience, and with the specific kind of self-compassion you have spent your entire life offering everyone except yourself, can be slowly, gently redirected. It doesn't happen in a revelation. It doesn't arrive as a single breakthrough moment. It begins in small, almost invisible shifts. It begins the first time you notice you are managing someone else's emotional state. And you pause, not to stop caring, but to ask, whose feeling is this actually? It begins the first time you let someone else's mood belong entirely to them. It begins the first time you say what you need without apologizing for the weight of it. It begins the first time you sit in a quiet room and don't fill the silence with someone else's comfort. The river doesn't stop flowing when you remove the dam. It simply goes where rivers were always meant to go. If you were this child, and maybe you knew it from the very first sentence, then let me say this directly to you. You are not too sensitive for your home. Your home was not equipped for your sensitivity. That distinction is everything. The depth you carry, the way you absorb rooms, the way you grieve things others never even notice, the way you understand pain in people before they have named it for themselves. None of that is a flaw to be corrected. None of it is evidence of something broken in you. It is a rare and quietly extraordinary quality that the world benefits from enormously. But the world will take it from you endlessly, if you let it. And so the most important thing, perhaps the thing this child spent years waiting to hear, is something quiet and simple and long overdue. You are allowed to feel without fixing. You are allowed to notice without absorbing. You are allowed to love people and still, at the end of the day, put down the weight of their pain. You are always allowed to need things. You are always allowed to take up space. You are always allowed to come home to yourself. Maybe that is where it begins. Not in the house where you grew up, but in the slow, tender, long overdue act of learning to live inside your own skin. Without apology, without folding, without dimming the very depth that makes you, quietly and unmistakably, you. The crack was never the end of the story. It was always where the light was waiting to come in.